Hi, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on the introduction to accident investigation. My name is David Lisser. I am the Vice Chair of IIRSM Ireland branch, and this is going to be a very informative webinar, so thank you very much for giving up your time to join us today. Before we move on, I would love to give you a very quick introduction to Andy Farrell. Andy Farrell is a very well-known colleague within the industry. He's a fellow member of IIRSM. He's also a chartered safety practitioner with IOSH. He's also with the Institute of Industrial Accident Investigation, Institute of Leadership, and he's also a member and a consultant with the UK Occupational Safety and Health Consultants Register. So huge credentials there and a wealth of background and experience. During his career in health and safety specialists, he's undertaken a wide range of consultancy and training projects, and that's from forensic investigations into potential legal liabilities. That's developing, presenting a series of courses on critical decision making for paramedics and officers in the Irish National Ambulance Service, and also including the International Scientific and Practical Conference on health and safety. So Andy specializes, and his specialist interest includes crisis management, in particular with the roles of planning and communication. So a real wealth of experience there that Andy's going to part some knowledge with us today on an introduction to accident investigation. So Andy, I'd love to hand the floor over to you.
Thank you, David. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the introduction, David. I feel ever so flattered. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm pleased people could join us. I hope they'll find this interesting. So the topic we've got for today is introduction to accident investigation. It is only introduction. It's quite a large subject. And if people feel, having heard this, they'd like to learn more about accident investigation, well, quick advert, my email address will come up on the final slide. So by all means, drop me a line, say hello, we'll have a chat. But let's carry on. All we've got to do is get the computer to work. There we go. So just to set the scene, as it were, let's just go through some basic definitions. And I've taken the first one from the International Standard for Crisis Management, and that's ISO 22361, which is quite an interesting document. And that defines the term incident as a broad label. It's an event or a situation that could lead to disruption, loss, an emergency, or a crisis. In other words, you're having a very bad day. So that's incident. An accident is generally defined as an unforeseen and undesired event that results in injury, damage, or loss. And a near miss is again unforeseen, it's undesired. It's got the capacity to result in injury, damage, or loss, but by chance, it doesn't. So in effect, it is an accident which doesn't quite work. You're lucky, you got away with it. But it's still very important because this time you got away with it, next time you won't. But these definitions make it clear then that the term incident, which is often used, it's actually a generic expression and it covers both accidents and near misses. People do tend to use them interchangeably in general conversation, but it's worth remembering they do have their own specific meanings. So that's the definitions. Now, before we move on, I was asked when I was being briefed about what you wanted in the presentation, I was asked, would I look at the issue of accident statistics? And I'm happy to do so. So statistics, of course, they're very useful in many ways. You can calculate the rate of accidents per year, which is useful to know. You can look for links between accidents and the type of employee. So, for example, Are all the accidents being caused by full-time employees or by part-time employees? Is there some sort of trend in there that you need to think about? It's handy to benchmark your organization's performance against another one in the same sector, so you can see how you're doing compared to the industry as a whole, and so on and so forth. There's many different ways you can slice and dice the numbers to suit your own purposes. However, we're talking real life, and there is one important caveat to bear in mind. Statistics like these are all very useful, but they're not necessarily accurate because they're all collected by human beings, and human beings have their own agendas. Many reasons why accidents, or incidents rather, are not recorded. And of course, they're not recorded, they don't go in the statistics, so the statistics are flawed. So examples you could come across. First of all, it was a near miss. And so management saw it as trivial. It's not worth the paperwork. I haven't got time for that. Nothing happened. No harm, no foul, carry on. What they're doing is they're missing the point that they got away with it this time. They may not get away with it next time. So it's important to record this. It's important to look at what happened. But because nothing happened and because there's pressure on managers, commercial pressures to keep moving forward, it can be pushed to one side. It's not that important. Mistake, but it happens. Or you could have a case where the organization, for whatever reason, doesn't want to risk attracting official attention. There's maybe a feeling that if we flag this up, then somebody's get to know about it. The authorities come in to check what we're doing. We don't want that. Even if the company's very, very well run, they just don't want people poking around. They're just nervous about it. It may be a manager is afraid of a professional embarrassment. Something's gone wrong, and if he reports that, is that going to bounce back on him, on his leadership, on his management skills? There's not a lot of damage being done and nobody's being hurt, or it's only minor injuries. Maybe there's a temptation to sweep it under the carpet, say nothing about it, and hope it'll all go away. And you can understand the human element there. The company may be concerned about raised insurance premiums. Keep reporting accidents, the premiums are going to go up. It costs us money. There could be anxiety about bad publicity, reputational damage, so on and so forth. So there's lots of reasons why that people may not record an incident, which means the stats are skewed. But what I want to do, and this is a personal thing, look at one potential reason for underreporting. And that's this practice of linking bonuses to the accident performance, i.e. the reported incidents. And I think this is quite often done. Now, the logic behind it is that you want to give the staff a financial incentive not to have accidents. There's a logic behind that. I can see that. But the belief is that accidents are based on employee negligence. Hence, if they're not negligent, you don't have accidents. But that is a flawed belief. That's not what happens. Employees don't go out looking to cause accidents. Normally, they try and avoid them. So quite often the accident is not necessarily their fault. There's many reasons why people make mistakes and have accidents, but negligence is only one of them. So this is a rather blunt approach. For example, what about a case where the incident is caused by something totally unforeseen, such as a machine's safety systems fail or a hydraulic hose ruptures without warning? It appeared perfectly well, perfectly good, and it suddenly ruptured and somebody got sprayed with hydraulic oil. Are bonuses going to get cancelled for that? I mean, is it the staff's fault that the hydraulic line gave way? They couldn't see it was going to go. It wasn't obvious. They're not at fault. Why are they being punished? And with that sort of feeling that there is a risk, and I say it's a purely personal view, but I think there's a risk if you have this kind of bonus versus statistics model in operation, then incidents are going to go unreported. And that doesn't do anybody any good. Anyway, that's statistics. Let's move on to the main topic. And that's actually investigation. Now, we're only going to look at some of the practicalities involved. Because of time, we can't cover all the aspects. We'll look at some practical hints of what to do, and just as important, what not to do. But it gives you a flavour of how accident works. It's a summary, if you like. So the first question that comes to mind is, why bother investigating? What's the point? Well, the aim of an investigation is to identify what happened so that a repeat can be avoided. What you're trying to do is keep people safe, ideally. Okay, you're protecting the equipment, you're protecting the company's finances, but that's secondary. The aim is to keep people safe. That's what safety management is all about. So that's what you're trying to do. The aim is not to find somebody to blame. And I think managers sometimes get confused over that. They think we'll investigate to find out who got it wrong and we'll deal with them. That's not what you're trying to do. You want to stop it happening. So the investigator's primary role should be to analyse the facts, not apportion guilt. That should be down to somebody else. Okay, it may be a case where, because of the company structure or whatever, the investigator's got to play two roles, but it's not a good position to be in. We'll see later on, we talk about taking witness statements. You've got to set the witness at ease. If you can say hand on heart, I'm not looking for a culprit, I'm just looking for the facts, that's fine. But if you've got to say, yeah, we may look for somebody to blame as well, you're not going to get cooperation. So where possible, the investigator role and the supervisory role should be kept separate. If, however, you do find what appears to be guilt, then be careful. Resist the temptation to stop at that point because you found the culprit, because that could be a serious mistake. Instead, ask why the person behaved as he or she did. Was it a momentary lapse of concentration where they may be distracted? Was there some significant underlying reason? Maybe something totally out of their control. Maybe, and this sounds ridiculous, maybe their training was flawed in some way. And that's not impossible. And I'll give you an example of where that came into play. There was a case in America just after the 9/11 attacks where an airliner just recently taken off, I think from New York, taken off, suddenly lost control and crashed, and everybody on board was killed. It's a new aircraft, an Airbus A320, and there seemed no reason. Initially, it was thought to be an attack on the aircraft, but it wasn't. When they checked the flight data recorders, they realized that the first officer who was flying the aircraft at the time had tried to correct turbulence. The aircraft was bouncing around a bit in turbulent air, and he'd done it by flipping the rudder from left to right, which is a technique he'd learned previously when he was flying on the Boeing fleet, different kind of aircraft. Now, he'd done a conversion course onto Airbus, and one of the things they had to learn was that the Airbus has got different characteristics. One of which is, don't try and correct turbulence by flicking the rudder backwards and forwards, because it'll make the aircraft unstable. But he did it. So you could stop the investigation at that point. So it's obvious. He's fairly experienced pilot, but new to this model of aircraft. Without thinking, he dropped into the habit of what he always did. He adjusted the rudder. That caused the aircraft to go out of control. The accident was his fault. And of course, he's not there to defend himself. But the investigators were professional. They realized that they were making an assumption, and we'll look at assumptions in a minute. They were assuming that he got it wrong, but he wasn't there to defend himself. They couldn't question him to find out. All he had was basic data. So they kept asking themselves, why do we know this is true? And they went back a bit further. They looked at the course he'd done to convert from the Boeing to the Airbus. So we learnt the new characteristics. Airbus were adamant that they told all the airlines you cannot use the rudder to control turbulence. So it should have been in the course. And it wasn't. Whatever happened, somewhere along the line, Airbus instruction, do not use the rudder, did not go into the pilot's training course. So when that first officer hit turbulence and started flipping the rudder, he was doing what he thought was correct. He didn't know that it was actually the wrong thing to do and was dangerous. He was let down by the system and he paid for it, as did everybody else. So they could have stopped and blamed him. They didn't. And that prevented not only a serious miscarriage of justice, but also meant the real cause was identified and future courses were amended so pilots knew what they were doing. So if you are going to stop investigation, just check you've gone far enough. And that means you've got to have a mindset. The investigator's got to think in a particular way. They've got to be neutral. So they're not sort of biased towards protecting one person or attacking somebody else, internal politics. They've got to have an open mind, be prepared to consider any option. And basically they go where the facts may lead them, whatever that is. Now, somebody working within the company might find that difficult because the truth may be an embarrassment for a senior manager who screwed up. But if you're doing the job investigator properly, you've got to go with the flow and follow it wherever it goes. You must have an inquiring mind. Don't take things for granted. You must want to know what really happened and not what seemed to have happened. And that's an example there from the previous aircraft accident. It seemed the pilot got it wrong, but what really happened was he'd been misled. And you've got to take nothing for granted. Constantly check for accuracy. Have I got this right? Am I on the right track? Have I misunderstood something? It's very important that you get it right. You've got to be open-minded, and that is a lot more difficult than it might actually sound. It seems easy, but it's not. The problem is we're human, and humans think in a particular way. And we use biases, we use mental shortcuts, one of which is confirmation bias. Now, how this works is if the investigator goes into an incident with the belief, I know what happened here. I've heard of this before. I've seen it before. I know it's another example of X, Y, and Z. He's going in with an idea in his mind already. It's unconscious, doesn't realize he's doing it. But what can happen is that any evidence that appears which supports this mental image that they've got, their theory, they will tend to accept because it's got to be right. If they come across data which rejects their idea, which says, no, that's wrong, they tend either to ignore that data or to minimize it because it can't be right, because I know what happened and I've got evidence that says it did happen that way. So they tend to push it to one side. So they're actually skewing the inquiry, but they're doing it without realizing it. That's why you've got to keep checking back. Am I on the right track? And we'll look at unconscious bias again later on, but come across another example of it. I mentioned assumptions are dangerous. What is an assumption? It's a belief we hold, but which there may be little hard evidence, like the pilot. Oh, he fell into bad habits, started using the wrong procedure. That's an assumption. You don't know that. There's no evidence for it. They're mental shortcuts. We use them all the time. Like my train will take about 2 hours to get to the appointment, so I leave at 8 to get there for 10. Fine. That might work in Ireland. In the UK, it's more of a lottery, but that's a separate issue. But useful though they are, assumptions can cause real problems. The danger is you start treating an assumption as a fact, especially if it seems obvious. It may not be that obvious, actually. You've got to keep asking yourself, how do we know that this fact is actually true? Have we tested it? And was the test viable? You've got to constantly, you're building a structure, if you like, with an investigation. And you start from the ground, you work your way up. The foundations are going to be correct, and all the bricks have got to lock together properly. If they're not tested, they're not going to lock together. It's going to fall over. Okay, so that's the investigator mindset, what investigations are about. So what do we need for an investigation? Well, any investigation will require evidence of some kind. And you've got three primary sources for this evidence when you start the investigation. There's three areas you want to look at. First of all is the physical. So you want to look at the scene itself. You want to look at, say, whatever tools, the equipment involved. Look at the lighting conditions, the noise, and so on and so forth. For example, if you've got a forklift truck has rolled, well, if the forklift truck was on a ramp which slopes at 45 degrees, that's giving you a fair indication of what went wrong. It's a factor to take into account. You need to look at documentary evidence. And we're talking here things like risk assessments, schedule of work, equipment records, training records. And don't forget the accident book or the equivalent, because that's very important. So you can check, has this happened before? Is there a trend going on here? Is this something that keeps repeating itself? And if so, why? It's a start. It's not going to give you answers, but it's a starter to your inquiry. And then finally, you look at the individuals, especially those who were directly involved in the accident or who directly witnessed it. And don't forget the injured person. They're also a witness. Although if they're in hospital, don't go around interviewing them. Wait till they come out. They need to be interviewed as soon as possible after the event, and then you can take the written statement later on. You interview them afterwards, because if you don't, that they could well start to forget things, that the information is not clear in their mind. So you want to get to it fairly quickly. Also, a source of evidence is CCTV. I should mention that. The scene may well be covered by CCTV, so make sure you get a copy of that as well. It might be useful. So that's the incident scene. Let's talk a bit more about that. The scene itself is what I would term as being fragile. Once something's been moved, you can't put it back exactly where it was, and that position might turn out to be significant. So move things as little as possible. So there should be a policy in place, a management policy, which says that staff leave the scene as intact as possible and for as long as necessary until the investigator said, okay, fine, I'm finished with the scene. It could take time, and that's unfortunate. But if you're not going to spend the time doing the investigation properly, then why bother? Because you're wasting your time. So you've got to have this in place, this procedure. Don't move things. You may have to move certain things, obviously. The poor victim is trapped under a forklift. You can't leave them there till the investigator turns up and takes a photograph. Obviously, you've got to move things, but you move things as little as possible. When you get there, you want to photograph the scene comprehensively and take detailed notes. It's a one-shot exercise. You're not going to go back a second time. If you do, things will be different. So you've got to get it while you can. So you'll take more photographs than you might need. You might shoot 100 photographs and require 3. Makes no difference. Now, especially with digital cameras, you can shoot hundreds, just keep on firing. You need to take measurements of possible key factors as well. So you can photographs and also a sketch plan with measurements on. So you can visualize and other people can visualize what happened. And if, say, that the incident involved a forklift truck, then if there are skid marks, we'll measure the length of the skid marks. Might be important. If the truck hit somebody, well, how far was the truck from the doorway? And so on. Get as much information as you can first time round. That's why the scene investigation takes time, because you're collecting information slowly but surely. But if you don't, you'll lose it and you can't go back and get it again. And it just might be important. Then you've got documentary evidence. Now that's, as I've said, things like training records and so on. Just a point about training records. HR, I can stand their point of view. They may be reluctant to release records to the investigator on the basis that they're confidential personal documents. And I can see their point of view. But the investigator needs them for a specific reason. So again, the management policy about accident management should really have a section in there which says that HR will release documents to the investigator as and when required. Maybe you get clearance of a senior manager first if you want to, but you don't block him from access to those documents because they could be important. So you take possession of the documents and you get the originals wherever possible. You're going to keep on file. Keep a note of where each document came from and what it refers to. So you've got a logical system that cross-references. If you downloaded something from the internet, say that the instruction book for using the forklift truck, it's probably the internet and not in paper. Then record the web address where you found the document so you can go back and get a second version if you need to. Word of caution, the original document is important. It may end up as evidence in a tribunal or whatever if there are legal proceedings. So never mark it. Don't write on it. If, say, you want to cross-reference one document with another, and you may want to do that, then make the notations on copy documents, not on the originals. And this is especially the case with witness statements. You have a signed witness statement. That is sacrosanct. You don't touch it now. It's signed. It's locked away. But if you want to compare that with somebody else's, with their signed statement, compare the copies. You can write on those to your heart's content, but don't damage the original. The problem is, if he did say go to a court or a tribunal for some reason, and that statement is produced, then you could find yourself in an embarrassing situation if you've written across somebody's statement, this man's an idiot. You might be right, but you've now got to justify that in court. And a lawyer is going to have great fun knocking holes in you, going, what does that say about your attitude to the investigation? Were you biased? Were you trying to stitch him up? Blah, blah, blah. You're going to get an awful lot of agony and anguish purely because you made a comment on the original document. Keep your comments to yourself. You shouldn't have them anyway. You should be neutral. But if you do want to make a comment, keep it private. And that takes us down to individuals. What you want to do is interview them initially and then get a written witness statement later on if necessary. Bear in mind that witnesses may be traumatized, especially just after the incident, and it might be a friend of theirs involved. So you've got to treat them with tact and consideration. Don't start bullying them or ordering or demanding, be tactful and work with them. Never, ever interview witnesses in a group. A number of reasons for that. One problem is that you may have a witness who's normally of a quiet disposition, but who's got key information. But because someone in the group is a bit of a loudmouth, they're not going to say anything. They'll just stand in the corner and say nothing. And they actually, without realizing it, have got some key information which you need, but you're not going to get it. Not in that condition. Also, people tend, without meaning to, they tend to listen to other versions and unconsciously they modify what they saw or felt or did. And they sort of come up with a consensus opinion as to what happened. You don't want that. You want individual opinions from different viewpoints. So never interview in a group, always interview in isolation. You need to get a record as quickly as possible, but you can't, you've got other things to do as well, like the scene and the documents. So get the main story from it in note form. Just what did they do? So you've got in bullet points if necessary. And then you can go back later on and use that as the foundation for a more formal interview. But get some record of what they said, what they were doing, and so on. We'll look at witness statements shortly and how to take them. One caution now, never ask a witness to write their own statement. It's tempting. You've got a lot of things to do, especially if you are on your own investigating a major incident. There's no support. You're doing everything. And you've got management breathing down your neck wanting to know what happened, and the insurance company want to know what happened. So it may be tempting to say, all right, we've had a talk about this, we know what's happened, can you write me out a statement? And the odds are they will leave out things which are important because they don't realize that they're important. So you need to take the statement yourself. They dictate it to you, and I'll go through that in a minute, but you write it for them. So to take the statement, you need to have a witness interview. And to my mind, that's the fun part of investigation. I used to like doing witness interviews. Then again, I was doing it for law enforcement, but interviewing people who weren't necessarily going to be cooperative. It was quite a battle of wits sometimes, but it was enjoyable. But yeah, I like the interviewing side of things. But you can't just gallop in and start asking questions. To interview the witness, first of all, you've got to plan the interview itself. What is it you want from this person? What gaps are they going to fill in the investigation? Or are they simply going to reinforce things you already know? You want them to confirm what somebody else has said. So you make the situation stronger. So you need to know what it is you're looking for. You also need to bear in mind who you're interviewing. And that's important because you have to do this with respect and to a certain extent compassion, sympathy. So who are you interviewing? Is it maybe a junior apprentice who's terrified out their wits and especially interviewed one-to-one with you, they may have no idea what's going on? Is it somebody maybe with learning difficulties? Is it somebody who doesn't have English as their first language? So will they need an interpreter? All these factors you need to bear in mind before you start the interview so you can approach them in the right way. And of course, part of the planning is make sure that you've got things like documents and photographs you may need to refer to. You actually got them with you. Because there's nothing worse than building up momentum of the interview, getting it flowing along nicely, and then, oh, well, what did you see in this photograph? Oh, hang on a minute. I'll just go next door and get it. You've broken the flow. Have your documents there. It also looks more professional if you actually got everything you need on the table ready to show them. So plan the interview. Do it in a one-to-one scenario. It's not helpful to have more than one person do the interview. It's not a job interview. You know, a manager may want to get involved. Well, politely, no, because they are going to put additional pressure on the witness who may be reluctant to talk if a manager is present. It's intimidating, and you don't need the manager interrupting. I remember when I did a refresher course as an accident investigator, we had to, because of numbers, we had to work in pairs. And I was interviewing the person who we suspected had caused the accident. That was the scenario. And I was getting him there. We were on the way. I was trying to get him, quietly coax him into a corner where he's going to say, yeah, okay, fine, I did it. And the lad next to me, young, inexperienced, jumped in and came in quite heavy. We know you're lying. Why don't you just admit it? You know, it works on TV. It doesn't work in real life because this chap immediately grabbed the opportunity. Don't speak to me like that. And he walked out of the room. He admitted later on, I almost had him until he had that bonus, an excuse to break the interview and walk out. So it can happen. So keep the interview one-to-one. Remember, and this is quite a big topic in its own right, but the way you ask the question can actually influence the answer you get. There was research done, just to illustrate the point, where groups of students, were shown video of a road accident, and they're all shown the same video. And then they were asked a set of questions about what they'd seen. And all the questions were the same, except for one. And that referred to the speed at which the vehicles collided. And it varied from what speed you estimate the white car was doing when it met the red car, up to what speed was the white car doing when it smashed into the red car. Okay. Same question. What speed were you doing? The way it was phrased. When they looked at the answers that were given, the estimates, there was distinct correlation between the description given of the speed, smashed, collided, bumped into, whatever, about 6 or 7 versions. The more violent the description, the higher the estimated speed. And yet they'd all seen exactly the same video. But their view was influenced by the question. That's the only change made, was the way the question was phrased about the speed. And what they were doing without realizing it is they were matching the tone of the interviewer. He said it bumped into it, can't be going fast. He said it smashed into it. Yeah, I agree, it must be going at a hell of a speed. And they adjusted their views accordingly. So be careful how you ask questions. The other thing is, don't ask more than one question at a time. Did you speak to the foreman about this? And if so, what did he say? Well, that's 2 questions. Don't get the witness confused. Ask them simple questions. Did you speak to the foreman? Yes, no. What did he say? 2 simple, discrete questions. Don't ask multiple questions. So what we can see is that interviewing, it involves more than just asking some questions and writing down some answers. There's an art form to it. There's a lot of psychology involved, and it's quite fascinating. It's enjoyable to do, but you need to think about what you're doing. Now, I've mentioned asking questions and the interview itself. Let's look in more detail at the actual interview technique, how you speak to the person. What do you actually do rather than ask questions? An effective technique is called conversation management. And for our purposes, we'll treat it as a 2-step process. So the first part is that the person involved, the witness, retells the account in their own words, in their own time, and with minimal interruptions. You only interrupt if they start drifting off, and some people do. He was talking to Fred. Fred, he's the chap who just bought the new Daihatsu. That's not important. You're back onto Fred. But you nudge them back gently. Don't get abrupt. Just nudge them back. Once you've got the story from them, now you go back over it. It's your turn. You go back over the account. You want to clarify what they've said, make sure you understand it. And where possible, you get them to expand upon the points which were raised. Because that will add a lot of important detail to the report. And the devil lies in the detail. For example, they said, oh, and then I heard Fred shouting. Fine, good. But let's take that further. Who's Fred? What did he shout? How did he shout it? Where was he? What did he do? In actual fact, Fred, who you'd never heard of until that moment, has now become another line of inquiry and another witness to be interviewed. And if you hadn't expanded on it, you would never have known. So you go back and you get as much information out as you possibly can. You do it quietly. It takes time sometimes, but you can't rush it. You chat to them rather than simply fire questions at them and demanding answers. That's actually the difference between an interview and an interrogation. An interrogation is you fire questions and demand answers. An interview, you ask them what happened and listen to what they said and have a conversation with them. So you've got their version of events. Okay. Obviously, you may well record it, and with their permission, you could do for reference purposes, avoid mistakes later. But really you want a written statement from them. That's the easiest format. So it's a written account, a written record of their account, their personal view. It should be written out by them, but sorry, it should be written out by the investigator, not by them. And it should use their own words as much as possible. So don't paraphrase, don't correct the grammar, don't adjust any jargon they may use. Whatever they say, you write it down. In fact, in criminal statements, the language can get quite fruity, but hey, that's what they said, that's what you write down. It's important that the statement is concerned with the facts and what the witness can add to the situation. So it only deals with, to use a legal phrase, certainly for the UK, it's a legal phrase, only deals with what the witness can speak to. So they've got direct knowledge of, it's what they heard, it's what they said, it's what they did, it's what they saw. You know, I was told by somebody who heard from somebody else is not going to go into the statement because there's no way you can test it. So you want the statement to contain what they said, their part in whatever the incident was. So they've got to be able to speak to it. Once you're finished, then you give them a chance to read the statement. And if they're happy with the statement, then they sign it and date it. But they only sign it if they're satisfied that it's an accurate record of the interview itself. Now, it's their statement, not yours. So therefore, if they want to change a word on reflection, I didn't quite, what I meant was, and they want to clarify it, that's fine. They can do so. If they want to take something out, no, you misunderstood, that's not what I meant, take a sentence out, they can do so. If they want to add something, they can do so. The only stipulation is that they do it on the statement and they initial in the margin that they have made these particular changes. So there's no question later on the statement's been tampered with in some way. It's their statement and they adjusted it and were happy with it when they signed it. And once you've got it, as I said before, that is now sacrosanct document. You don't play with it. If you need to use a reference later on, get a photocopy of it and you can make notes on that for your heart's content. But don't write on the original statement. How are we doing? Okay. Right. So now you have gathered the evidence and you could have quite a lot of it. You've got stuff from the scene, you've got stuff from documentary sources, you've spoken to the witnesses and taken statements. And you've now got a pile of documents to go through. Now what do you do? Well, basically, you can group the evidence into 4 general categories. And evidence can overlap between one another. But it always helps, therefore, to have a log of your evidence. When you collect documents, make a note in a logbook of what they are, what they refer to, where they came from, and give them a reference number. And do the same with the statements. So at the end of the day, you've got all these items of evidence, but they're each uniquely identified. And you know what they're about. You can now start to cross-reference them as well. But you've got essentially 4 different categories you can put them into. And sometimes evidence can go into more than one category. You've got the workplace. So you've got the physical environment. You've got the equipment that's being used. You've got the materials that are being used. So what are they telling you about what happened? What do you know about them? You've got the task itself. So you could be documentary evidence to what the task was and how it was meant to be done, how fast it was done. So what's the workload? How many of these items were meant to be completed every day or made every day or every hour? What's the complexity? Team dynamics. That might come out basically through talking to management and the witnesses themselves. If you think the team dynamics might start to be a factor, then you can pose the questions generally in the interviews. You know, well, how was the supervisor? What's he like as a supervisor? Was his instructions clear? You're getting some idea of how that team operates. And again, going back to documentary evidence, have there been complaints lodged about the way that team's being run? So that might be useful to have. You look at the personnel, the competence, their health, were they tired? How many shifts had they been working? Were they potentially overtired? Are they getting job satisfaction? If they are, they'll take more care of it. If they're just doing the job, then there's less chance they're going to notice mistakes, or there's less chance they're being careful. They're not being negligent as such, but they're just not being quite as fastidious as maybe they could be. Competence is an interesting one. Remember that competence is not just that somebody's done a training course, because, well, the example I always give, they've done a training course, they've passed the test. The roads are full of people who've done a training course and who've passed the test. Whether they are competent drivers is another matter entirely. They're probably not. So competence is having the skills, the knowledge, the understanding, and other factors. And I always argue that other factors means they actually give a damn. Do they take it seriously? So you got to try and assess their competence. And again, personnel records may give you an idea. Have they been on disciplinaries all the time? No, don't jump to conclusions. The fact the person has twice been on disciplinary for sloppy work does not mean that he was sloppy this time. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't assume. But it's a factor to bear in mind. It's an avenue to explore. And then look at the organization. The safety culture, the supervision. Safety culture should come from the top down. It's not just a paper exercise. Look at the leadership, look at the management systems. What can you find out about that? What are you seeing as you're going around? That's how you can break the data up. And a starting point is to have essentially a timeline of the events. So you can plot out logically what happened and when. Gives you an idea what's going on. A simple timeline is useful. What you can use with management technique is an Ishikawa diagram, the fishbone or herringbone diagram, where you've got the main timeline from start to finish of the event along the center. And then from there, you've got the spines coming off, each of which is a different event, which in turn can each lead to a different line of inquiry. Like he went in the warehouse, he heard Fred shouting, then he got a line of inquiry as to what Fred is, what he did, and so on. So that's the framework. It's a useful way of doing it. There are other ways of analysing incidents, but that's a straightforward way of doing it. There are software packages that are more statistical approaches, depending on complexity of the system. But this is only an overview. So these are the basic ideas as to how to figure out what happened. So then you've got the analysis. So what you're looking at, have you got an answer that works? Does the account you built up match the evidence? What you've been told, what you've found out, taken together, does it all actually make sense? Or are there discrepancies in there that you need to think about? Remember that people have got fallible memories. So don't be surprised if people forget things or maybe get them in the wrong order. It happens in conversation. You're talking to somebody. Yeah, I saw him on Tuesday. No, I tell a lie. I saw him on Wednesday. They're not lying. It's just they're human. They don't recall facts like robots. So they've got fallible memories. Make sure you've covered all the lines of inquiry. Okay, Fred appeared as line of inquiry. Did you follow it? Did you stop it? Have you stopped at the right point? Have you stopped before you should have done? Have you got as much out of this as you can? Or are there still areas that need exploring? Have you tested the evidence? How do I know? How do I know this is right? Am I using assumptions? Am I making, have I got some sort of bias coming into this? That's what you're going to think about. And you're going to put a report together. So have you checked your findings for accuracy and lack of bias? Are you happy to write a report and stand by that report, no matter what happens as a result of that report. Are you happy to stand by it? If you're not, go back and find the weak spots and correct them. Think about the analysis. I've already mentioned unconscious bias. There's another one to think about. It's very important, and that's called hindsight bias. You know, people often say, oh, well, it was obvious that was going to happen. Yeah, it's obvious because you know what happened. Hindsight bias is an effect. It's like watching, say, an Agatha Christie murder mystery film, very complicated, when you've already read the book. You know what's going to happen. You know how it all slots together. You know where the letter was hidden. You know about the secret door in the library. It's not a new idea because you've already seen it. So it's not quite as startling. You've got to put yourself, with hindsight bias, you've got to put yourself in the position of the person at the time. What did they know or what did they believe at the time of the accident? What information had they got? What was their understanding? And once you know the state they were in, then and only then can you ask yourself the question, were their actions reasonable? Did they do what they reasonably thought? Remember that pilot. You know, hindsight bias. Well, you can't do that on an A320. It's going to go out of control. It's obvious. It's only obvious if you know he didn't. He believed it was the right thing to do, and it led to an accident. So you've got to be very careful that you're not jumping to conclusions, allowing bias to take over. So then you produce your report. Now that report can only focus on verified facts. You want to deal in fact, not in supposition, as far as possible. You want to know what happened, why, and crucially for management, how you can stop it happening again. They don't want to know what happened. They want to know how to stop it. That's more important in a way. A word of caution, don't put in the report any references to rumours or gossip. Now, you may come across these when you do the interviews. People are saying, oh, well, everybody knows that that doesn't work properly. Well, he's got a terrible record for doing this, that, and the other. They can't speak to that, but it is what we used to refer to as intelligence. It's a line of inquiry to follow through. Is he really as bad as they think, or is he simply a clash of personalities? And if he is that bad, did it have an effect on the accident? But it's just at that point intelligence. You can't report on it as a fact. You may find there are gaps in your narrative because certain things were unobtainable. You know, nobody knows why Mr. A was in that part of the warehouse at that time of the accident. You know, you've got an idea, you can make an assumption based on what you've learned. It's a reasonable assessment, but you've got to make it clear it is an assumption. It's not definite. It's more than likely he was there because of A, B, or C, but you can't be certain. So you don't want to mislead people. Be careful that you don't recommend sanctions. And I'll just say there may be situations where you have to. Okay. But if you're going to do that, if that's part of the remit you've been given, maybe against your will, then bear in mind it's rare for somebody to have an accident deliberately. Normally people try and behave safely. As we've shown, apportioning guilt is a heavy responsibility because can you be certain that they were at fault? It may look like that, but have you got all the evidence? Put yourself in their position. Did they behave negligently or not? Bear in mind that sanctions, unless they're very carefully used, unlikely to bring about long-term improvement because people don't go around deliberately having accidents. And it might even be counterproductive. People start to get not such afraid of management, but they don't want to cooperate. So it's counterproductive. And it could result in serious incidents being hidden from management review. So you can't make positive changes. And go back to the idea of linking bonuses to statistics. That could backfire in a big way. So you've got to think, if you're going to use sanctions, if you have to, be careful about it. So it's a discipline in its own right. and this is just an overview. Statistics provide an insight into how effective the system can be, but they've got their drawbacks because they're drawn up by humans. The aim of the investigation is to find out the cause of the accident. You don't want it happening again. You're not just trying to find somebody to blame. You need to analyze the evidence carefully. Beware of assumptions, beware of bias, which can happen to the best of people. Focus on the facts and be careful about sanctions. Where possible, leave that to somebody else to sort out. So, thank you for listening, and any questions? Hello?
Thank you very much, Andrew. Wow, that was, I'll tell you what, I took so many notes here, I can almost write a book, and that's just an introduction. That was brilliant. Thank you. No, that was great. So what I'll do, I'm just going to quickly go, just sort of run through a couple of my thoughts, and then what we'll do is we'll go on to the Q&A.
Yeah, sure.
So just these are just sort of some of the things that I've taken away, certainly, and hopefully it might be a bit thought provoking for those that haven't got a question, and you may want to ask a question. But for me, it's one of the things is where there's an absence of information, our brains start to fill and start to plug their gaps. And that's when we start to end up telling ourselves stories. And it's not a deliberate thing, but it's with that absence of information, our brain starts to make up the stories. And I love how you captured that sort of piece there. It's also during interviews, and this is not just accidents, but generally, and I love this that you picked up, is that don't make it about the personality or the character. Make it about stick to the facts. Make it about the behaviors. And if you're having opinions, you need to be able to back them up with facts, because, as you said, opinions are not facts. So I absolutely love that. And again, it's not about attacking the personality or the individual. It's really about the behaviors. That's what you want to be focusing on, and I love it. And I love this piece as well. Sorry, there's lots I love. Interviews are conversations, not interrogations. And that's great, because as with all conversations, listening is an incredibly important skill. And it's about listening with the intent to understand, not to respond, because that's where you're going to pick up that information. That's where you're going to pick up the little nuggets that you could potentially miss. If you're thinking about, oh, how am I going to respond? You'll miss those little nuggets. So listening is really, really important. I love that. And then really last one for me is, well, two things, is test your assumptions always. Test your assumptions, because that helps eliminate your biases. And then also the last one is competence is the combination of the skills, knowledge, training, experience, behaviors. And I love the one you added was attitudes. I think that's really, really important as well. So no, thank you very much, Andy. I've taken a lot away from this as well.
My pleasure. Right.
So before we go into the Q&A, please do, everybody here, follow us, share, like, reshare our content on our page, because we hold our committee meetings every month, and we are putting together a really great program of events. Our next event is going to be on changing driving behaviors, and that's going to be in June. So please do look out for that one. And then also, don't forget, we are a really proactive committee. So please do reach out and ask for any support, from the committee, because at the end, in the end, we're all here to support each other. So, thank you very much, everyone. And we'll move on to the Q&A. So I will just quickly nip in and see what questions. Andy, you can get access to these, can you? On the Q&A?
Let me have a look at that, see if I can see them coming up.
If not, I'm happy to read them out.
You might want to read them, because Andy's presentation's up and you might not be able to see them.
Oh, I see. Okay, so here's a question. So any tips on creating or developing a no blame culture? Because a lot of people are programmed to avoid admitting mistakes and the fear for being blamed, and understandably so.
Yeah, I think that the point is, with the no blame culture, it's based on trust. You are trusting the person to make an admission that they got something wrong. In turn, they are trusting you not to kick them out the door. It's a two-way process, and you've got to prove that you will, your intention is to make things better, not find somebody to punish. And it's a fine dividing line, because you cannot use the culture or allow it to be used as an excuse for getting it wrong. Oh, it doesn't matter. They don't blame anybody. Just admit it and just carry on. There has to be a point where you draw a line and say, right, you've had a chance and you're not trying. Now we start involving sanctions. But where possible, you need the trust. I understand what you did. I'm trusting you not to do it again. We'll learn from it. You will learn from it. If both sides can show learning, the system's going to work. It is trust-based. And if people abuse that trust, then they have to be dealt with.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Next question is, as a safety professional, how to overcome the incident underreporting for both employees and senior managers?
The perennial question, isn't it? It's trying to get the point across that the reporting is not just some bureaucratic form filling, that there is a purpose behind it, because you can't fix problems unless you know what they are and you know how big they are. That's essentially what statistics are about. So you've got to understand that. So you need people to cooperate. But again, as I pointed out, some of the reasons people don't want to report is this fear of maybe dropping themselves in it, or dropping a manager in it, or the company being investigated. You know, you've got to be adult about it and make it clear you're not looking for somebody to punish. But you need to know you're trying to keep people safe. If you don't know what's going on, you've got one hand tied behind your back. You want cooperation. I think, again, it comes down to trust between both parties to make the system work.
Brilliant. No, thank you very much. And we have one last final question, and that is, how do you manage clients' expectations when they insist on reports being completed within unrealistic timescales?
That is a good question. And I have a slight advantage because as a consultant, it's a case of we do it my way. But they can't give me orders. I mean, I've had this happen where somebody's making unreasonable demands and I've terminated the agreement because it's not going to work. I can't work with you. And, yes, you're paying me money, but there's the report you paid for, the draft, and that's as far as it goes because I can't work with you. Obviously, if you're an employee, then you can't say to the manager, no, go away, going to do it my way. You're not in that position. It's up to the managers to understand that the reports take time, because if they're not done properly, then you may as well just not bother, because it'll miss out half the information anyway. There shouldn't be a deadline on reporting. It should be done, even if it's a case of fine, I won't do a final report. I will do an interim report. This is what happens, say, with aircraft accidents, railway accidents, or so on. They produce an interim report. We've got this far. This is what we found out. This needs to be developed. These are lines of inquiry, and it's ongoing. And when we're finished, we publish the full report. And maybe that may be the way forward. You need to have something, because, okay, to be reasonable, the manager's got managers. So he's got to keep them happy. So, all right, I'll work with you, but I'll do a report, but it will be clearly marked interim report, ongoing investigation. And it's a compromise. And then let me get on with doing my job.
I love that one. Love it. There is one final question coming. We will take this, but then we'll close after this one. So can you offer any advice on how to deal with pushback from senior management on any findings from your incident report that they are uncomfortable with? For example, an employee potentially being under pressure or working frequent overtime.
Yeah, I think, again, I have an advantage that I'm getting paid for my opinion. And if you don't like it, then just pay my bill and I'll go away. It's definitely your employee. But I think as the investigator, you have to have integrity. And so therefore you say to the management, sorry, but this is the situation. I don't think that is safe. And document it. Now, if management then ignore you completely and carry on doing whatever seems to be dangerous, well, that's not your problem, really. You've done what you can. You've told them clearly it's dangerous, why it's dangerous, why they should be doing something else, why that is a better approach, why it works. But if management blindly carrying on, not listening, and just doing what they're happy to do, then you can't do much about it, really. Just document it, because when it all blows up, as it will do, you know, it sounds callous, but hey, I told you that was going to happen, and I've got a record to prove it. You know, I tried to warn you, you wouldn't listen. But it's not a comfortable position to be in. I fully agree. I mean, I joke in a way I've been a consultant, I can walk away. Yeah, I can. It costs me money, but I can. But I appreciate if you're there, your job depends upon this person. You've got to negotiate with him, but you've also got to stick to your own ethics. I say, look, that is how it is. I'm sorry, but you know, get somebody else to investigate. They might come with a different idea, but that is the answer, and I'm sticking to it.
No, lovely. Thank you very much, Andy. Okay. That was great. And thank you everyone for giving up your time to join us today. And don't forget that the link to this webinar will be up on the IIRSM portal, and that will come out fairly soon. So thanks very much, everyone. That's a wrap from us, and we will see you very soon.
Thanks very much. Bye now.